Mark.
It's 7 p.m. Tuesday, what day?
29th.
I just got back from vacation. It's October 29th. This is the initial meeting of the Climate Policy Advisory Team. So we have some administrative things to take care of and then begin work with Cascadia, go from there. The first thing on the agenda is for staff to kind of facilitate introductions. Pretty sure you're all familiar with each other, but just in case. I'm Mark Hoffman, Community Development Director for the city. I've been here for this year, working on comp plan. Now we're going to do climate element with this temporary task force. Tonight we're going to elect a chair and vice chair, talk ground rules, introduction. The task force was set up with 3 members of the existing planning commission, 3 members of the climate action committee, 1 member of the tree board. We have 2 alternates. We have the option of keeping them involved if they wanted to attend. And they're aware they will be kept updated through the regular committees and so forth, but chose not to attend tonight. So they're available in the future. From there, I guess we could go around and take care of introductions. And then after we're all done, Cascadia can introduce us.
I can start. I'm Victoria Putas, she, her pronouns, and I'm on the tree board. I've been on the tree board since January.
I'm Ann Utiloid, she, her pronouns. I'm on the Climate Action Committee and been with that since it began.
I'm Jan Nikaye. I'm the vice chair of the planning commission. He, him pronouns. Lived in Lake Forest Park about 12 years, and I work for King County. And in that context, I've had a chance to work with Alexandra and Gretchen from Cascadia. So I know these people already.
I'm David Cleveno. I'm on the planning commission. Prior to that, I was the chair for the tree board. I was been involved with city activities for many years now. I actually don't know how long I've been on the planning commission, but my background's in organizational development and change management. But I'm now a teacher, for a special ed teacher.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a change. It's a great change.
I am Miriam Bertram, she, her pronouns. I am from the Climate Action Committee. Worked with these folks to write the climate action plan that helped inform some of the stuff that you've seen. And were you on our, did you help? Were you on? Yeah, I thought you were. Okay, yeah, so we've met.
I'm Sarah Phillips, she, her, and I was on the planning commission in the ancient of days. And I'm currently on the climate action committee. And I'm the chair.
Okay, you're turning it to me.
Yeah, go. We have 1 additional regular member, Lois Lee, who's not in attendance.
Okay, sounds great. Well, great to see some familiar faces. And if I haven't met you yet, hi, I'm Alexandra. I use she, her pronouns. I've been at Cascadia for about 1.5 years and previously was working in the public sector. So have crossed paths with Yane in that context. And yeah, I worked to support the climate action plan. I conducted the equity review as part of that team earlier this year. So that was great. I'm excited to bring that familiarity with the CAP into this project. And I'll just note that I will be kind of your constant attendee throughout these climate policy advisory team meetings. And we have a deep bench at Cascadia, so we'll be bringing in a number of different folks on our project team throughout the meeting. So you may see some familiar faces, some new faces, and I'm excited to lean on their expertise for the things that I am not an expert on. So yeah, I will be introducing those folks as we kind of cross those different project bridges. But I want to pause and see anything else, Mark, in terms of introductions?
Not yet, yeah, and we'll get to the actual agenda items in a little bit. So we're good for now. Item 2A is the initial action tonight, and that's nominations and election of a chairperson. They would right afterwards chair the meeting, including the next item, which is nomination and election of a vice chair that would serve in the absence of the chairperson. Staff doesn't have any background or preparation. I was hoping for a discussion or nominations or volunteering. The only thing I know is it can't be me and it can't be Alexander. So I thought I'd leave it to you. The democratic process.
Well, my thinking is it should be somebody from the planning commission. This project is gonna go to the planning commission. And it seems like that's a natural sort of link. Then they're in their own home territory. They're gonna introduce this through the planning commission. So my inclination is that oh, you two or Lois. We could we can elect Lois, but she's not here. That'd be a surprise. That'd show her for not showing up.
Well, that would leave the two of us if we go down that path.
Well, it's funny because I was gonna say, well, maybe it should be someone from the climate action. So,
Yeah.
maybe we can split that, between chair and vice chair. Not, and no disrespect to the tree board, but we have
None taken.
3 and 3.
So do either of you want to do it? I guess
What do you
that's the
think?
question.
I've got a vice chair seat on the planning commission. I don't necessarily feel I need another leadership role right this second. Would you be willing if you were so nominated?
I would. And what I can bring to this role is, my expertise is in implementation of big change. So that's what I did in the corporate world prior to becoming a teacher. So I can bring that knowledge to the work that's ahead of us.
Yeah, the nomination for chair, do we? I guess would be official. Do we have a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous.
All right.
Thank you. We have a chair. Now the meeting's all yours. Second.
All right.
Chair.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's welcome, everyone. So let's go ahead and do we have any nominations for vice chairperson?
As I suggested, I think it'd be great if it were someone from the climate committee, so. And I'll let you 3 fight it out amongst yourselves.
No, I don't want to do it. That's done.
Be happy to do it. I'm going to be in town during this time frame, so.
That's right. You travel pretty extensively, don't you?
Well,
Didn't you
no,
say that at one time?
I did back in the misspent youth. No, we've been caring for my father for a number of years and so. But we have other issues that will keep us at home for months, so.
Okay.
Be happy.
Nomination and the second,
Second.
and all those in favor?
Right?
Yes.
Unanimous. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Sorry.
Okay.
You better get him out of that chair.
But
All right. Then moving forward, meeting minutes. Well, actually, we don't have any meeting minutes, so let's
Adopt the agenda, I think is first.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yes. So agenda, anyone have any questions about the agenda as it's set forth?
I'd move to adopt it as written.
Okay, second,
Second.
all in agreement?
Right.
Discussion, okay. All right, then I don't think we have anyone from the public online, right? Well, it wouldn't matter anyway.
yeah,
because
we
they-
don't, and we're not taking on remote or online comment.
Okay, so new business would be Alexander?
Great. Thanks, David. Yeah, excellent. Okay, so I think if it's okay with you, I'll share my screen and talk through an overview of the climate element. Let me just get my technology set up here. Okay. Is that coming through on your end?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'm just gonna make my video. There we go. Now I can look at you. I can look at you all through the lens here. Okay. Great. So what I'm hoping to do is just provide a brief overview of essentially like what is a climate element? What are we working towards? What are the regulations that we're working within? And we'll make plenty of time for questions. Please like interrupt me at any point if you have questions. I think I can see you all, so feel free to just like put your hand up and I'll pause. Okay. So first of all, what is a climate element? So in 2023, the Washington legislature signed House Bill 1181 into law, and that requires that it adds an additional element to the Growth Management Act. So cities and counties need to build in a climate consideration into their comprehensive plan. And House Bill 1181 requires two different pieces that, excuse me. So to meet those requirements, Department of Commerce recommends that jurisdictions develop climate elements that include two sub-elements. We'll get to those in a minute, but ultimately they must maximize economic, environmental, and social co-benefits and prioritize environmental justice. And a climate element can take a form of a single comprehensive plan chapter and stand alone, or it can be integrated into several chapters, such as housing, transportation, or land use. And we can talk a bit more about what that might look like for Lake Forest Park at some point. But these two sub-elements that I alluded to are, one, a resilience sub-element, and this is mandatory for all counties and cities under GMA, and then encouraged for some of the smaller cities and counties. And the second piece is this greenhouse gas emissions reduction sub-element. And this is mandatory only for 11 counties and their cities with populations greater than 6,000. So, oh, my little bubble's out of alignment here, but that includes King County. So Lake Forest Park is one of those jurisdictions that is required to do this greenhouse gas sub-element. So for the resilience, oh yeah,
Sandra,
go ahead.
If you, are they, so can you go back one slide for a second?
Mhm.
So under this or the resilience sub element, Lake Forest Park is also mandated to include that.
Yes.
So, okay.
Yep. Great clarification. Thanks. And so this resilience sub-element, your transition was perfect. It has three different requirements that we're working towards. One, address natural hazards created or aggravated by climate change. It could include sea level rise, landslides, flooding, drought, heat, smoke, wildfire. Requirement two, identify, protect, and enhance natural areas to foster climate resilience, as well as areas for vital habitat for safe species migration. And then the third requirement is identify, protect, and enhance community resilience to climate impacts. So that includes social, economic, and built environment factors, which support the adaptation to climate impacts consistent with environmental justice. So I'm gonna pause on resilience because I know I'm throwing a lot of terms at you here, and just see if you have any follow-up questions about the resilience piece.
Do.
Yeah, go for it.
When we're looking at the issue of addressing natural hazards, how broad is this scope? We have significant landslide areas. There are obvious historic landslides within the city of Lake Forest Park. There are obvious slump blocks. There are obvious oversteepened slopes that have been identified in various documents, but I have never seen a comprehensive document that has actually identified, for example, our landslide risk areas at the level of detail that is appropriate when you're looking at, on a broad scale, countywide, yes. On the detailed scale of our city, I don't believe that work has been done. And when we're looking at, for example, flooding, we know that we have groundwater discharge areas throughout the city, especially in the valleys. Again, I don't believe these have been mapped. Wildfire risk is a very interesting component, given our commitment to being a tree city. So my question is, to what degree of detail are we going to go into here? And where is there work that we would not necessarily be a bit aware of that has already been performed at a county level beyond things like sensitive ordinance acts, et cetera, or work that is planned at a county level that we could piggyback off of?
Great question. I'm making note of your question about what has been performed at the county level. I think that's a question I'll get back to you on. And I think to your question about the degree of detail that we'll go into for this project, I have a slide in a minute here that talks about like the scope of what we're doing as a project team to support this work. But one of our first tasks is to conduct a climate impacts summary. So we'll do it's a kind of a two-phase approach. So we'll take a look at the climate impacts that Lake Forest Park may be experiencing. And we rely on UW's climate impacts mapping tool for that, as well as some other data sources. And then that would be like the basis for discussion. We're planning to bring that to you all, I believe, in November. And when we'd have a discussion like what's missing, what do we need to consider? And that would be the basis for our vulnerability assessment. So we can talk a bit more about that. And I want to make sure that if I don't fully answer your question now, that we do get to it in a few slides here. And then, yeah, great question about the work the county's done. I think at a minimum, we'd be incorporating that kind of work in the policy audit. And I believe it will also inform the vulnerability assessment, but I don't want to speak out of turn on that piece. Any follow-up questions, Anne?
Will we be getting these slides?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we can keep chatting about the resilience sub-element. This is just to kind of lay some foundations. We're going to be talking about this a lot, so we can come back to this at any point. For the greenhouse gas sub-element, so these are the three requirements put forward by Commerce. One, the greenhouse gas sub-element should result in reductions in overall greenhouse gas emissions generated by transportation and land use. Requirement 2 is it should result in reductions in per capita vehicle miles traveled within the jurisdiction, but without increasing greenhouse gas emissions elsewhere in Washington. And then requirement 3 is to prioritize reductions that benefit overburdened communities in order to maximize the co-benefits of reduced air pollution and environmental justice.
Alexandra, one of the questions we get all the time when we're talking about it is emissions from airplanes. And I don't see that in there, and it's a third in the what was generated by the county was a third of our emissions from air travel.
Like over Lake Forest Park or on?
Well, I don't know. No, we were allotted, King County allotted us based on income and population, a certain amount of the air travel.
Okay.
It was actually checking on Lake Forest Park, people actually
It
traveled.
was not calculated, it was a pro rata assignment.
Okay.
But it's a question we get all the time in terms of talking about it. How people say, well, now what? We don't tell people they can't see their grandchildren. So it's a tricky question, but I think it's one we need to think about.
Right.
Reduction.
Yeah, and one piece I want to just note, so we're not going to go very deep into greenhouse gas pieces tonight, but I connected with my colleague Jenna, who is our greenhouse gas lead for this project earlier today, and just made sure I was bringing like the key info to you. She is also working to support the King County, the K4C project. And Lake Forest Park is a participant of K4C. And one thing that Jenna noted is that Lake Forest Park has chosen as part of this project scope of work to address, is going above and beyond for commerce. So we've included a vehicle miles traveled study and a locally specific greenhouse gas inventory, which is one step further than the commerce requirements. And so we're hoping that that will bring a lot more nuance into your discussions around greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So a bit of a preview. I am by no means a greenhouse gas emissions expert, so I'm really excited to bring Jenna to one of your upcoming meetings. I think she'll probably come and join us for the December meeting or the January meeting. So we're going to be doing some greenhouse gas work behind the scenes, and we'll bring some discussion topics to you later this year, early next year.
So Alexandra, who initiated that work?
The King County, the K4C, I don't remember what the 4 C's stand for. Mark, do you know? I'm gonna put you on.
In the city's climate collaboration.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
We're a member.
Okay. Great. And then, and I think this is starting to get to your question, but just to give you an overview of what tasks Cascadia and our colleagues are doing. So I should note that Cascadia is collaborating with SCJ Alliance and Fair and Peers as 2 other subcontractors. SCJ Alliance is working on the comprehensive plan project for Lake Forest Park, and Fair and Peers, they are experts in vehicle miles traveled studies. So we're going to be working with them on that piece in a few months here, but we're working with SCJ Alliance to make sure there's alignment. And then what we've got on the screen here is on the right-hand side, tasks 1 and 2 are kind of this project kickoff. We have engagement scoped throughout the project. So working with the Lake Forest Park community to make sure we're keeping folks in the loop on this project and how it might impact them and where there are opportunities for input. Task 3 in that blue bubble is the policy audit. So one of the things we do early on is we take a look at all of the documents, comprehensive plan documents that are relevant to our assessment, and we basically say where are the policies that currently address climate change, if there are any, and if not, how can we, like, where might there be gaps or opportunities for improvement, or places that we could plug in potential new policies. And then the green bubble in the middle gets to your question, Anne, about this climate impacts piece. So we are getting that work going in the next week or so here to assess what climate impacts is Lake Forest Park already or going to experience. And then that is a precursor to a vulnerability assessment, which we can talk a bit more about if you'd like, but I'll preview that I'm not an expert on those. So that is also queued up for a future meeting. And then task 6, as I mentioned, is doing the greenhouse gas emissions analysis. And then the purple bubble on the far, that's the right-hand side of the screen, is putting all the pieces together. So where are those opportunities for potential new policies, revising existing policies, and ultimately integrating climate change into the comp plan. Any questions on the 30,000-foot view of our project? Okay, we'll keep going. Okay, I have, let's see, I have a timeline slide. I'm gonna put it on the screen here and we're gonna walk through it together. So there is a lot here, and as I mentioned, I will be sending these slides out so you can peruse them in your own time, but I want to just point out a few things. So we're somebody, okay, we're good. We're here at our first climate policy advisory team meeting. We're kicking off the project. We have, this on the top of this timeline here, those are the different project activities that we'll be working on as your consulting team, kind of behind the scenes. We'll be bringing different touch points to you all throughout this project. And then on the bottom here are just a few of the like different community engagement activities. And this is preliminary. So right now we're working on a draft engagement plan. We're planning to bring that to the city next, a draft version of that to the city next week. But a few of the engagement activities we've got queued up here is we want to put together a bit of a website overview of this project, create some talking points and materials to support that. And Sarah, to get to your point, like making sure we're clear on messaging and how we're sharing information out about this project with city residents. As we move through the project here, we'll want to make sure that we're keeping folks in the loop and we're updating the webpage as needed with any key touch points. We're hoping to do a community-wide survey in the early 2025. And then some of our other engagement activities is we would like to do maybe a public open house. We also have budget to do some focus groups or interviews with any key community members or organizations or audiences that you'd like us to engage. And then the deliverable, so the thing that we're striving for is this draft climate element by June 30 of 2025. So that's right around the corner, but we're hitting the ground running. And so by June 30, we'll have a draft of that climate element. And then over the remaining 2 quarters of 2025, we'll be revising. Maybe we'll do a public comment period for a bit more nuanced review, and then hopefully leading to adoption in December. Yeah, go ahead.
I had a couple of questions. One, who hosts the website?
Yeah, ultimately it'll be Lake Forest Park. So the city will have the website and we'll work.
Who keeps it up?
Wait, say that again?
Who does the upkeep of the website?
Yeah, we haven't talked about that. They don't know. You're looking at them. Now, the problem with that is I have not been able to get 10 minutes over this year to actually learn Municode or whatever that is. So I'm relying on Elizabeth for other committees. Realistically, it's the city clerk. So now with Jessica as deputy city clerk, can be established, populated, and the format can be set. We should do that fairly early with her. Then over time, we update it as you need.
Well, the Climate Action Committee has been very eager to have a webpage. So we got things we want to put on it. We have talked about people want to know how to get rebates and how, you know, sort of stuff that is, can we do that?
We could look at it. The webpage that we haven't talked about with Cascadia is this effort, this project specific. So I know we're at least doing that. Then the side conversation would be.
Right, but they're getting paid, you're getting paid, the city's getting paid to put up a website through the contract.
Yes and no.
Okay.
The material and the draft element in the work is Cascadia, but they're not going to come in here and do the Municode work. Jessica will teach us.
And the website lives with the city, so it's.
The website lives with the city.
Yes.
And so we have control over the material, whether we have a separate discussion about ongoing climate items on another subpage, that can also be talked about. But the webpage we have envisioned but haven't discussed yet is specific to the CPAT and the climate element effort.
Okay, we'd like to,
You know, as
we'd just like to pile on, just
Yeah.
saying. The other question is, when you say you're bringing the engagement plan to the city, you're not bringing it to us? I mean, we're not meeting for a month.
Yeah, we will probably, I think this is, I'd welcome your thoughts on this, Mark, but I think, you know, we're hoping, I have a few questions for you all and just a couple slides here to help inform our development of this engagement plan. And, you know, I think we're not ultimately seeking approval from anybody on the engagement plan, but I think we can bring, you know, we could bring a final version if you'd like, final version in November. We can share it with you electronically if you'd like. There's a couple different options for how we could get feedback. But
we had our first consultant and internal staff coordinating meeting yesterday. The short time we had led to, yes, we're doing that, some suggestions, what could it look like, including third place comments, the mural, the kiosk, things like that, but we didn't solidify them. But the part of the discussion we have with Cascadia is we need to move fast, right? The overall 2-year comp plan, there was time to go with that engagement plan and get it endorsed by city council. We're not gonna have time for that, nor is it required. But the thought yesterday was we should at least formulate a draft, circulate it, and get buy-in by this committee. If you're comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And then we would share it.
We've just done a lot of outreach. I mean, we've done probably 8 or 10 events in the last year and sort of outreach to people as the Climate Action Committee. And so we have some experience.
Yeah, yes.
that we'd like-
And we, I think, really want to lean on that. And so I think where I see opportunities is like, I think the engagement plan is kind of the overarching structure. And then when we get to those milestones of like, hey, we're looking to do a survey, like what are the best practices? We could, hear a bit about what worked well for Lake Forest Park for a survey and have some more brainstorming on the kind of approach specific, discussion, if that makes sense. But yeah, we do really want to get your input on what's worked well.
A little bit. I'm sorry.
Before we do that, let's just clarify the role of the engagement or the plan for the engagement plan. So the intention is to bring that to us in the next month. And then we'll discuss, is that the plan?
We had some very basic ideas yesterday to create a draft. If your timeline is to share that draft with staff, what I would suggest, once I receive it for our files, that I share that with this committee so that those comments can be captured possibly at the November meeting.
Great.
If that works for your timing.
Yeah, definitely. We can.
then- Go ahead, Alexander.
I was thinking, so our next meeting is the 19th, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we could share that with meeting materials like a week in advance or
That's
by the
great.
end of next week.
Keeping in mind it's the holiday season. Oh my gosh, I can't even believe that.
Yeah.
So it'll be a tight turnaround. And so once you distribute that to us, then we'll comment on it in November. And then solidify any changes for December. Is that what we're thinking?
It's too late. The product's done already. Right?
No,
I think we,
basically, we just give them our thoughts, because again, they are not required to get our input, nor are they going to necessarily accept our input. They're just creating a plan. But we'll have an opportunity to at least comment on it, and we may have ideas that are useful.
Okay.
That you may want to include in your final version.
Is that how you see it, Alexander?
Yep. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I see it as like a living document too. So it's ultimately a guide for us to work from, but we don't have to set anything in stone.
the other question I had was, if we have the draft element done by June, what's happening in Q3 and Q4?
Well,
Like-
the contract with Cascadia runs all of 2025.
Ah.
It's based on the $500,000 grant from Commerce. Their fiscal year and the grant deliverables are due by actually June 15th. And that gives them 15 days to say that I gave them everything or not. That works for the grant. The grant is closed out. There's the deliverables. The draft has to exist. The way we wrote the scope is it's a draft. Doesn't have to be fully baked at planning commission or recommended, and it certainly doesn't have to be adopted. So you have the flexibility through June to create a draft. Can you amend it after? Yes. Does it need to be realistically whole? Yes. But
Does it need to be?
real,
Oh, okay.
not just, here's the current working draft, here we go.
Concept of draft.
Yeah, it has to be pretty good. A little bit more than a concept. But then from June onward, if you need more time to collaborate with planning commission, hold a joint meeting. Planning commission is in charge with the actual amendment.
So Cascadia is on board with us through the end of 2025,
Yes.
but we're only meeting until June,
In the context of having a draft element, yes.
in the context of that piece of paper.
But
Yeah.
yeah, exist. And for exist, that usually means that this committee is still involved, but you're done. There's a product. That product has to be a planning commission with some understanding that that's going to go forward. What doesn't have to be done is be done at planning commission and nowhere near city council. It doesn't have to be acted on. So that's how we know it can be amended. But if you amend 90% of it after June, did we really fulfill the grant?
So is it fair to maybe describe it as this committee is gonna work really hard through June to get this draft in place? Then as the planning commission, if the planning commission wants more interaction and input or revisit some things with this committee becomes a little more ad hoc in terms of when we meet. But after June, we could reconvene either jointly with the commission or the commission sends this group some questions or clarifications, and then we meet. Does that sound about right? I'm just trying to imagine sort of how this committee's role changes after June.
Still in existence now, the resolution that forms this committee. Essentially, it's a temporary task force due to the conclusion of this effort. Anticipated to be late 2025 or fall of 2025. So the work of this committee doesn't end in June unless you're done.
Unless it's perfect.
So that's
Yes.
perfect in June, then in which case, then yeah, you're perfectly fine.
So where on this timeline does it go to the planning commission? In Q3?
The tree board, the CAC, the planning commission will be updated every opportunity, probably at every meeting. That way, we're never starting from zero. If we get into the spring and there are portions that you would like them to review or comment on, then we can do that. We don't have to wait until there's a whole binder.
Right.
You can, but you don't have to. If you get into May and June and we haven't reached that phase, then it's likely we're gonna give them the document in one big chunk. But if we are working towards that in June and can deliver that anticipated draft element to Commerce by June 15th, that's fine too. Nothing in the scope requires the planning commission to hold a public hearing by then. But it's that genuineness, you know, did we really do a really good effort? Then we have the local flexibility to work through May, June, and July at planning commission. At that point, just like comp plan, it's racing to preserve as much time at city council so they can give it good thought. But that's why that summer is kind of, let's see where we're at.
So am I interpreting correctly that the direct answer to your question is, yes, we'll show the parts as we go, but the our final product is the bullet point at the bottom of the top section, Q2 draft element, and the rest of that sentence is draft element getting to a planning commission. Correct?
Yeah,
Page
in my world, if this is a lot of work, the two sub elements, the greenhouse gas and so forth, are gonna be done outside this meeting and you'll view that that technical work is being done behind the scenes. If we can get to June 15th, and I could put on the website, this is the draft element that will be going to planning commission July 4th, on your holiday. At the same time that I transmit it to Commerce, that's perfect.
Okay.
But if we're still halfway through the draft element and their question is, when are you gonna go with the amendment to planning commission? I don't have comfort level that I could submit that to Commerce.
Okay, I just don't understand the refine based on feedback. Who's refining it? Is it going to the plant? If we're not
Planning commission.
If we're not around, does that refinement of the,
Where are you?
we're
So phase
Phase
three.
phase 3 and
Could I offer?
Yeah.
My understanding based on this discussion is that just because there are no little green bubbles saying additional CPAT meetings TBD under Q3 doesn't mean that there won't be any. but they may take on a slightly different form. We may be, for example, invited to a planning commission meeting instead of meeting separately with only a couple of planning commission members here.
Which is what Jan is saying about
Mhm.
ad hoc meetings.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that the action of refine in phase 3, both columns, is that action is being taken by planning commission, not by this.
The planning
And we may
commission,
be called in to assist with that, but you are the ones who will be carrying out the actions in those 2 columns, correct?
And then somewhere in Q3, beginning of Q4. Planning Commission makes an official recommendation. On a comprehensive plan. Annual docketing amendment. For 2025. Then that goes to city council with enough time. To be reviewed, possibly amended, public hearing. Adopted by December.
So in theory, we have kept the climate action committee updated sufficiently that comments have been captured and integrated into this document, but before the draft element is completed on June 15th. And if additional input is needed, that would be directed to planning commission. Again, we've just got additional expertise that may be useful and helpful. With the understanding that planning commission's in the driver's seat as far as finalizing and approving whatever goes to city council for their review and approval. Have I got that correct?
that's my understanding.
Yes,
Sounds good.
the draft climate element is this committee. The comprehensive plan amendment is the planning commission. What is the amendment? This document. It's semantics. But this committee is responsible for what that draft element is.
Okay, I'm sorry to be a. But we're talking about this community engagement down at the bottom, right? So there's a community, you're gonna give us a look at what you think it is, and we'll be and you're gonna launch a website and create materials. And then you're doing sort of the same thing in Q1, 2, 3, and 4. But in Q3, who's listening to you?
Hopefully full on planning commission for part of that.
So, okay. So at Q3, everything goes to the planning commission, is that right? Okay,
Yeah, but there's still opportunity for involvement.
okay,
In other words, this committee doesn't disband as soon as that goes to. If you choose not to meet again, then it can, you could send a chair or vice chair to sit in with the planning commission.
And we'll know more as we get into this.
right.
They'll no doubt have a lot of questions.
I'm loving the questions and discussion. It's great. Other input, other questions on the timeline?
Both the consultants are involved until the end of Q4, right?
Yes,
So, okay.
December 31st, I believe. That's the drop dead day. Every hour after that is just me.
So we're talking to a fellow who'd really like to see it.
You really want to be done by that.
Great.
And I'm just kidding. If we get to that point, there are contingencies, we get that, but then we need to amend contracts, we need to identify, we need to find funding. I'm hoping not to get to that stage.
Okay, great. And just to add to the discussion here, I did try to simplify and expand what these, on the bottom of the slide, what these CPAT meetings will be discussing. So this is a rough CPAT specific timeline. So I'm going to walk you through this. So on our meeting today, we're kicking off, we're talking about some initial thoughts on goals and priorities at the highest level, 30,000 foot. So we'll get to that in a minute. In November, we'll be bringing the engagement plan, which is not noted here, but we'll also be discussing and reviewing the climate impacts and getting your feedback on that piece. And during the November meeting, it's not written here, but we'll also be starting to discuss the plan and policy audit with you all a little bit, and just introducing that idea. so that in December, we can bring you the policy audit results and talk through any gaps and opportunities. We'll also, during the December meeting, probably be transitioning from the climate impacts summary into the vulnerability assessment and what that process will look like. January, we'll probably be discussing and reviewing the vulnerability assessment and identifying gaps and opportunities, and then discussing the greenhouse gas inventory and kicking off that emissions discussion. We'll continue that in March, so reviewing the inventory assessment for greenhouse gas emissions. And then we'll also be starting to share out and provide info on the findings from the gaps and opportunities and what potential policies might look like. We'll probably have some preliminary policies for you in March, so that, you know, March and May, there's a little bit of squishiness there on when we bring you those draft goals and policies. But as Mark mentioned, we have that June 15th deadline looming. So May will be our policy and goal discussion. How are we turning all of this data information into comprehensive plan policy? And then June is discussing and reviewing that draft, the full draft climate element. And we can, so as these are noted here, we don't currently have meetings scheduled. I put rough months, thinking maybe we want to have one in May and in June, but if necessary, we can meet in March, April, May, and kind of shift that up a bit. So tentative timeline, open to feedback here, and we'll continue to build this out with a bit more specificity as we get in the weeds of the project. Any questions on our CPAT meeting focus?
At what point are you going to be doing that vehicle mile travel survey and reporting on that?
Yeah, great question. I believe that's happening in this early 2025, and I think that will be brought forward as part of the greenhouse gas inventories, but I can confirm with our VMT folks.
One just thought here, just having been on not only this planning commission, but on a different one years ago. I feel like, you know, that we're unlikely to not need meetings. We're very likely to need more meetings. So my preference, if the group, you know, would do that, would be to schedule out monthly all the way to June. And then absolutely, if we can drop one, that's awesome. But
Right on.
it just gets really difficult to add meetings late and get everybody to show up. You know, we all have busy lives. So I would prefer to have a schedule every month to June. And then if we don't need it, great.
Agreed.
This was very successful, the first 4. They're already programmed in. We have the web link. It's consistent with Zoom webinar. Jessica, the deputy clerk, will be at some point early December doing all of 2025. If we can, I'll propose some ranges, right? We also can have 2 public meetings in one night. That's why we have one link. I'll propose some dates again, like we did for the first 4 with Cascadia. We'll do the doodle poll in advance. And so to the extent that we can get what you would like to the deputy city clerk while she programs it, then you're all set.
That'd be helpful.
Thanks, Mark. Okay. Excellent. Well, I wanted to check in. So I do have a couple discussion questions. If y'all are interested, we can spend a few minutes talking about our kind of engagement plan efforts. I'll put those up here. Just kind of preliminarily recognizing we're building out the draft now. I think any feedback you have that I can collect and incorporate would be great. So just a few very broad discussion questions, but are there any key partners, entities, organizations, any key audiences that we should be keeping in mind and prioritize in our engagement efforts? And then is there anything in particular you'd like to see reflected about the climate element in communication materials? So would love to hear, Climate Action Committee, what worked well for you, what didn't work so well, any kind of broad reflections. And others, what have you seen from other jurisdictions or other processes that's worked really well?
Well, we have a list of community partners and mailing lists to. I shared with Mark most of it, although I've done some additional adding to it. So we have apartment buildings and boards and condos, and a list like that for some outreach. I think the key partners, it's the Commons, the Stewardship Foundation, the Rotaries, the environmental keepers, stream keepers. I mean, isn't that the list? That's my list. So
It's a pretty common list.
yeah.
I think one of my questions would be, to what degree do we want to engage with PTA and school outreach? That was a place where we were unsuccessful last time.
It's hard to break into that. You have children in school?
I do not. I'm not your in, sorry.
But the PTAs, that Anne is exactly right. The PTAs is a hard nut to crack it, and we never did a good job on it.
Let's just keep that in mind. This one we place. If we want to go down that track. But we could, Alexander, what do you want? Just a list of or the Planning Commission has a list. You all have a list.
Great. Yeah. I think this is more of like an open brainstorm time. And if you have any lists and it's easier to just send them to me, I'd welcome it. And
Public surveys that we did, we have an email list of people who would like to be kept updated. And I think when the website's updated, when you have a web page for this project on the city website, there should be an opt-in for people who want to receive more information by email, so that you're constantly building that list.
I'd say also the Planning Commission, we did a online survey this past spring, and can we harvest the emails of the participants? Yes, I mean, just, if you're engaged in planning, this is just another piece of that, so that would be great, and that would be sort of a little more of an organic list, that it's not an organization, it's people who have shown an interest in the comp plan.
No, it'd only be those participants that chose to give us the email,
Sure.
And that generally consists of the content. But then gift certificate. So it's not.
Oh, gotcha.
So one other area that we did not attempt to reach out to, there are businesses who pay business B&O tax to Lake Forest Park every year. And that might be a list of just contacting the businesses, they're all small businesses in our community who may be interested in engaging on this issue.
And the other area that I think we had most trouble with, and maybe too, is the high school students. They have a passion, but we never found a way to access them in a way that engaged them. We had two young people on a climate committee the first year, and they graduated, and we were just unsuccessful in getting new kids. But it's not that they don't care about climate. They're very concerned about climate. When we engage with them, they're interested. So that's, again, if you have expertise or experience in breaking through to the high school kids.
So I think that's a really good point. I think what happens is that, particularly for high school kids, is that any kind of long-term commitments don't work for them, right? So if we could do short-term involvement activities with teenagers, then I think that would work better.
I think in general, you typically need a faculty member or teacher kind of champions that involvement. That's how you get it, whether might be a science or environmental studies or some kind of teacher, but it is really hard to get in sort of just by broadcasting to students. So, I mean, my wife's an administrator in the district. I could kind of see if she thinks there are some faculty, specifically at Shorecrest probably, that might be, people to talk to. I'll look into that. Otherwise it's really hard to get in.
They used to have fairs where we would come and talk to the kids when they had to do senior projects, right? They don't have to do those hours anymore.
Can I ask a question about your focus groups? What would you be talking about in the focus group?
Great question. I think that's to be determined, kind of pending how we want, the point at which we want to have those focus groups. So right now, like, we are scoped to offer focus groups, and for other jurisdictions, we've used those in a number of ways. So it might look like bringing a set of key questions to a particular audience, like, hey, we want to get some feedback on this particular policy, or we want to get some feedback on this memo or an aspect of the vulnerability assessment, and we need more information, so we're going to use a focus group. So I think it's up for discussion, and like, we'll be part of hopefully some of that any feedback that you all provide, and as we further build out our timeline. Great question.
I guess I was thinking about the second point. There is anything in particular we want to see reflected about the climate element? And I think that there will be parts of the community that are going to be resistant to this change. And so if there's some way of greasing the skids as early as possible to help people be more accepting of the changes that will happen after you're gone, I think, but that are going to be part of the comp plan. So if that sort of thought process can be part of it.
Especially thinking about what's the intention of all this involvement, right? It's not that the city is doing this to people, to the members of our community. It's that we've got to adapt to this change. So it's what's our messaging that we want to be expressed in all of these activities and reaching out to groups.
Specifically with focus groups, has the city done focus groups for similar things in the recent past that you know of?
My short answer is no, because my role is more process oriented under code, and then you get to the comprehensive plan, did a survey, workshops, and it's highly dependent on people attending voluntarily.
Yeah.
So I would say in my process, the focus groups are tree board, Parks and Rec,
Yeah.
captured audiences, and hope that people are at least aware of the effort and can come.
Okay. I ask because in other spaces I've been in, it has been very hard to get people to do focus groups and find folks to attend and who are willing to participate. So I was curious if there was already a process to do that here.
I participated and they paid me. No, not here, but
Yeah.
in another life.
That's generally how we get people to do it too at work.
But I think
Is that something that we're able to do?
Groups like Stewardship, and these organized nonprofits, absolutely. But given the timeline and how we're supposed to march forward, there's no opportunity to create those. We don't have a marketing budget. Then the question becomes, what are we testing? So that's why those existing resources, if we call them focus groups, but reach out a little bit more than just a notice and like attend if you want to say something.
Okay.
A little bit more gravity. We have that opportunity. And then the third place commons option. I don't know that we have. anything detailed about that, but we've included it as far as possible workshop. I know we'll have public hearings here later, way down the road, but we didn't really iron out in public engagement the role of their place companies can play, even though we know we're going. So in this review of the engagement, whether it's your kiosk or any existing resource that we can call a focus group that's already there, that we'd say.
So for a couple of years, we used Earth Day as a focal point for having a large community gathering. I don't think it fits the schedule. I think if you're getting community, I think it will be good to do something for Earth Day, but I don't see that necessarily fitting the schedule for this project. In terms of getting input for this project, I still think that we should have something for Earth Day next year where we're discussing all of this and engaging with the community and using the Climate Hub, that third place comments as a venue for that. So I think we should have that discussion sooner rather than later.
Similar timing, I haven't talked to the whole tree board about it, but I talked to Mark about it on Saturday when we were hanging out at the Commons. Tree board will be hosting something for Arbor Day in the spring, and I chatted with Mark about potentially making that more about educational opportunities and doing like hosting a tree walk and other things, and this is potentially another thing that we could incorporate in information and education. How much of that is feedback versus just like FYI, this is a thing that's happening, so you're not caught off guard when.
Do you recall the Arbor Day date next year, or don't know off the top of the head?
When is the Green Fairy? Is it like later in the summer, spring?
It was end of March last year, I wanna say. I think it was the last weekend in March.
Google on my desk.
The other thing about the climate element, when you say, is there anything in particular you'd like to see reflected? What the Climate Action Committee has 3 goals, and they're very synchronistic with what you've laid out. They are reduce emissions, build resiliency, and support the ecosystem. Those 3 goals are embedded in the Climate Action Plan, and we talk about those very specifically. And I think if we can build on those, that's a, we got graphic, you made the graphics, right? And then we have the 5 elements underneath that were, transportation and buildings and solid waste.
I mean, we have been envisioning having presenting the climate action plan to the community in a public event. That hadn't happened yet. Is there a way to do that in this context?
Yeah, the other work won't stop.
Right.
So while the climate action plan is adopted, it needs to be clear what it is. It's more implementation. It's, it's the end result. What's missing and is mandated here is the policy. So an argument can be made it's backwards, but we're fortunate we have both opportunities. This would fill the gap. If you did that with the climate action plan, because it's adopted, you don't need to wait for this.
I was just thinking that, yes. But it might be a framework for inviting public comment on what this is.
Like if you wanted to achieve that, get climate action plan out there, it exists. Fully
Right.
supported. And then if you wanted to add a second element to that gathering of awareness and
Yes.
comment for this, sure.
Right, that's
They're
what I was,
consistent. It just needs to be clear which one's which.
right.
So besides the website, what other communication materials are you thinking about, Alexandra?
Great question. We have made, so just thinking about what we've made for other jurisdictions is like fact sheets. So for example, we could put together a fact sheet for like, hey, these are this is the highlight of the 4 climate impacts that might impact Lake Forest Park or whatever it might be. So I could see it being fact sheets. I mean, I think that the web page is like our first big announcement. It might be any precursor of like, here's a timeline of what you can expect for the climate element. Here's like key touch points when you can see, you know, as a citizen, like when you could plug into a community-wide survey or an open house or a focus group. Like we could provide more informational flyers about those events. So still in the works. Yeah, and I can, if it's helpful, provide more examples of what those materials have looked like for other jurisdictions as well.
I'm comfortable waiting until you provide materials in advance of our next meeting, because I think we've had a good discussion on this, but I think it's probably also got where it can go tonight.
Great, yeah.
One communication I would like to see though, in the next newsletter that goes out with the city, is that this. What? This Friday. This Friday? Oh, okay. I mean, but it'd be nice if there was just a vote saying this has been kicked off. Right, that
So one paragraph.
But let me say this, my fear in hearing about that this morning was, I need something. I gotta add something, and so my struggle was deciding what it is and writing and get it to them by Friday. That's my deadline. If it exists, and all I have to do is hand it to them on Friday or wordsmith it, that's a whole other thing, we can do that. And that brings us to Thanksgiving. Apologies that deadline's so early, but if we miss that, then the next one's right for Christmas or January, so it'd be key. But then we pretty much have to decide right now what it is. If it's just a
That's for the
blurb,
e-news?
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, not the e-blast, but the clerk's.
Quarterly.
Yeah, there you go. Get the terms mixed up. It's the rarer, more in-depth one. It still has a limit as to the number of words. It's not that long. It's a paragraph. I think it can be done if we decide tonight that paragraph is this effort's going. What is it? I think I can craft that from one of my resolutions or an agenda bill or something, if that's what you want.
Yeah, I think something very short and succinct that says, look for, we'll be updating our city website with a page for this project. Check there. Just not, noting that it's kicked off so that there's full transparency to the entire community. And meetings will be posted on the meeting schedule, and check the website because there will be a project specific webpage launched before the end of the year. That's safe, right, Alexandra?
Absolutely. Yeah. And Mark, let me know how I can support you in pulling together that blurb.
And I think what I would just add to that is like, what's the purpose of this?
Yep.
Like what's our goal? What's our end goal?
Mm-hmm. Have there been announcements in that e-news about the comp plan update? I'm assuming yes, but.
The comp plan update is taking up the bandwidth for that type of notice.
Okay.
The CPAT and the climate element and the climate grant have more or less gone into e-blast and the city administrators report to the city council. Now we're at that point where that gets elevated, comp plan continues, but after tonight, CPAT and newsletter and e-blast significantly go up. So this solves my problem of having something by Friday. So I'm happy that you guys got it put together. I think I have enough.
Okay.
Given that structure, it's not terribly wordy. Every time I hand one in, half of it gets cut, so I think we're okay. If I panic, I'm gonna call you on Thursday.
Great. Yeah,
Thank
please do. Okay, great. I think, David, as our chair, I think I'm ready to move us into our next agenda item.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay. So, anything before I dive in? Yeah, great. So I sent out a very draft set of operating principles as part of the agenda. I put that current draft text into slide form just to kind of walk through. And really what I'm looking for is like any feedback on those operating principles, anything you want to change, anything that's missing. This just is a bit more of an administrative thing to make sure we're all on the same page about your role here, your responsibilities, and that we've captured it for project. Ready to dive in? Okay, great. Awesome. So as noted in that operating principles document, the role of the climate policy advisory team is to temporarily support and advise the city on policy and regulations resulting in the addition of a climate element to the comprehensive plan with the resolution posted there. And then I've got kind of 5 overarching purpose bullet points here. So 1, help us analyze climate information to provide recommendations to city staff and the consultant team on key focus areas for goals and policies. Provide recommendations to the consultant team and staff to confirm the direction of materials presented and review and recommend climate element goals and policies. Participate in meeting discussions to help hone the direction of the climate element that considers measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, local climate impacts, community vulnerabilities, and advance environmental justice goals. And then review and provide feedback on information gathered through the engagement processes. So ensure the climate element considers feedback from affected communities, stakeholders, partner agencies, and city staff. And lastly, to steward the process and build broad community support to enable the city to successfully adopt the climate element with the comprehensive plan. Any edits, anything you disagree with on the purpose statement, anything you want to strike here or hone?
Just one comment, Mark, if you need any more information, here it is with the newsletter. So.
Guarantee that's too many words.
You got to take your whole nut, want to
Yeah.
add that.
Thank you.
I think support the planning effort is.
CPAT, sports planning effort.
I think it looks pretty good.
Yeah.
I think that's what I thought I was signing up for, pretty much.
And
Always a good sign.
just for way of background, this originated when the scope for the Commerce Grant came to be. That was augmented by the city council for tree evaluation and assets and so forth, slightly. It was accepted, we were awarded the grant, the city accepted the grant. Then that was used to do the RFQ for consulting and the negotiation and basis of the contract with Cascadia. So I could say it's vetted and acceptable to the city council. If you're comfortable with that, can it be amended? Sure. And will things come up? Sure. But if you are comfortable with that and you achieve that, that represents the mission.
I'm comfortable with that.
We didn't need to vote on that.
Okay.
Great.
Great. And you can think about it for a minute. We can come back to this. I think you have materials. Most of you have materials in front of you. So if you change your mind, if something crops up, let me know. We'll keep walking through. You all are our members. We're missing Lois tonight. And then our 2 alternates also didn't attend tonight, but are going to be kept in the loop and are available to attend meetings as needed. And then just noting the 2 positions for qualified interested residents will currently go unfilled. I don't think that should be, I think that's probably all, you already know that, but just making it noted.
Is there any attempt to fill those 2 positions, or are we just moving forward?
There was, and through the formation and nominations, and then at the time of confirmation by city council, it was the clock's ticking, let's move on.
Yeah, good.
Is that something that should go in instead of saying go to the website for a website that's not up? Is that something that should go in the blurb Friday that says the group is coming together to do this thing if you're interested in participating?
I wouldn't mind, and I'm biased, right? We did that through the summer. Been to every city council of 4 or 5 steps, and so there's a lot in my mind that nobody else has had the experience. So for me, that box is checked. And then from my perspective, let's create this document. But that's it. I wouldn't mind if somebody qualified and interested
Get
join,
forward.
but we would have to go back through that process, nominate and confirm. And it's only October, but
Might be easier if we had somebody in mind who we think we could that easily fit this process. I mean, not that I mind either, it's just the time.
and it was to broaden the perspective. The discussion in council was also at the student level. And they did not amend it to include those elements because of time. But the 2 residents was an option that we thought we would achieve, and that it just didn't happen.
Anything else on membership?
Can you get us this list with phone numbers?
Emails.
Keeping in mind that officially we can't email all at one time.
Well, the city has to initiate the email
Exactly.
if it's going to be to the entire group.
Otherwise, it's considered an official meetings.
Serial meetings.
Great. And I think, Mark, just on a point of process, I think I have everyone's emails, but I don't have everyone's phone numbers, so.
And that's why I said I'd make a habit of not collecting phone numbers. Because then I have a bad habit of giving them out, so I prefer email. And not making that error, if you don't mind. So that nobody
So,
unexpected calls you at home and says, where'd you get this note, or Mark gave it to me.
Well,
Or public records
we can
request.
choose to give each other phone numbers if we
Yeah,
want to
that's
give each
at
other
the
phone
end of the
numbers,
meeting,
but
we
we'll
can
take it
discuss
off.
that.
of this. Yeah.
Outside of the meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
great. I'm so sorry. I think I might have cut out for a moment, but hopefully you can hear me.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. I think my internet is deciding it's too late. Okay, so I'm gonna shift us into working agreements. Maybe for a moment, I'm gonna turn my video off and just so I don't lose you, but I'll come back online here in a second. Okay, so I am a sucker for working agreements. I think they're very helpful to just guide our time together and our meetings. Hopefully this isn't too surprising here, but we're asking that you are present, which means attending all meetings, be on time and participate in our group discussions, communicate your capacity. Let us know if you're unable to attend, and we can plan accordingly and find alternate attendance. And I'm going to zip through these, but we can come back as needed. We ask that you come prepared. Members and alternates will strive to come prepared to meetings, review agendas and materials ahead of each meeting. Meeting agendas and materials will be distributed in a timely fashion. And I believe this means like roughly 3 business days before the meeting when things are posted on MuniCode, but Mark can correct me if I'm wrong there.
Usually the Friday before, but I know not all the dates are on Tuesdays.
Okay.
We try and give you the weekend. So that it's not, here's the material. We expect your review comments tonight.
Great. Yeah.
Now, the one exception is presentations. So like tonight, ideally, we would have emailed the slides ahead so that you have them, but didn't have the obligation to review them. A lot of people like to have them in front of you and so forth. So a presentation can be worked on all the way up until the meeting. And then we want to get it in your hands. That's not packet. Packet materials will be just like planning commission early enough that you can have some free time in your personal life to review.
Okay, and I'll just offer that I think for things that are longer documents, we'll do our best to give you more time rather than less time, because we know you all are busy folks and we don't want to add too much to your plates here. Be respectful, engage in discussion intentionally and thoughtfully, assume everyone is coming in with good intent, understand your positionality and privilege, both within the CPAT and your own community. Be cognizant of how much you're talking and don't talk over others. Challenge yourself to speak up if you have something important to say, and invite others to speak if appropriate. And if you disagree, challenge the idea, not the person. And if you say something that has harmful impact, apologize for the statement's impact. And lastly, be precise. So ask specific, ask specific questions to gain clarity on topics or issues. Avoid generalizations that can reinforce inaccurate or harmful stereotypes. And finally, consider equity and environmental justice, prioritize and benefit overburdened communities that will suffer disproportionately from environmental impacts and climate exacerbated natural hazards. So those are our kind of 5 working agreements. Any additions, edits, amendments?
It's like, we're good.
Okay, great, awesome. And then lastly, these procedures. So I think this is an expansion of what we talked about a bit earlier, but the Climate Policy Advisory Team will advise and provide recommendations to city staff, council, and planning commission. Members will share their input and opinions during meetings. Minority opinions, along with the reason for dissent, will be noted in any advice or recommendations. The chair will be responsible for gauging the degree of input and additional discussion needed. Seem okay? Looking at you, David, new chairperson.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Great. Awesome. Okay, I think that's it on this agenda item. I'm going to try turning my video back on here, see how the internet does. Okay, I think we're ready to move to our last item here, which I don't have much in the way of slides. I just have a couple of discussion questions. So this is where I think I'm going to ask you to like think a bit bigger picture. We've started talking about what your values are already, but I'd like to hear, and maybe we can do a bit of a round robin. So have each of you share, but I'd love to hear, what does a climate resilient Lake Forest Park look like to you? And from your perspective, what climate impacts are the most important to be addressing within the city of Lake Forest Park? And I can keep this slide up here if it's helpful, but I am excited to just hear more from you, like what your perspectives are. And I think pulling on your personal experience, your professional experience, the role, the hat you're wearing, whether it's tree board, climate action committee, planning commission, like broadly interpretable on these questions. But yeah. Victoria or Sarah, does one of you want to start?
Yes, I want to start with the second question, the perspective on what climate impacts are most important to you. And I've been thinking a lot about Asheville and how close it is to what to Lake Forest Park, in the sense that there was sort of a sense that they were a special place, then that no climate was going to come and get them, and that I experienced some of that where we're talking about now. I mean, in the community, when we talk about it, that there's sort of sense that the impacts of climate are going to happen somewhere else. And I think one of the things that we're learning from the hurricanes and from that slide that was on Bellingham is that it's not we're going to have more. We're not having more hurricanes. We're just having more intensity. We're not having more rain. We're just having more intensity. And that's where I've been thinking lately about where people are. It seems to me an obstacle to overcome in terms of working with the city effectively. I don't know if that's true, because it's sort of a new thought.
So what's the new thought?
Well, just that it's not that we're going to have more days of rain. We're going to have the same number of days that are more intense. Those result in climate impacts that are different from landslides, That's the most obvious one, flooding. And that those are, and it's a shift in the way we think. If it's raining the same number of days, but it's raining harder, or, you know, it happens, get 2.5 inches and then, you know, those are climate impacts that have shifted because of like climate.
I appreciate that angle because I think it is the extremes, whether it's the heat or it's the flooding. Those are things you can really feel and experience and can really hurt your community in a very short period of time. So I appreciate that angle. Just because of what I do professionally, I think a lot about water and water conveyance and things like that. And I think there's some practical things I think about, like I've worked a little bit on the strategic climate action plan for King County. And we talk about things like, how do we design, you know, what are our standards when we're redoing culverts? Right?
Yeah.
And how do we size them for climate, you know, projections? And we've done that now. So we, you know, for the county, we actually have standards that get at, you know, it needs to be not this big, but this big, because we have to actually, you know, take seriously the fact that we're going to have bigger floods than we've had before and all that. So I'd like to, so I think I have a little bit of an infrastructure type angle on this, that we're really thinking about our future needs and infrastructure from a climate lens. And that to me is something that we really want to advocate for in this plan, I hope. And that's one example. I'm sure there are other infrastructure elements, but I think a lot about culverts and road crossings and, you know, things like that.
In addition to culverts, the pipes, the cost that potentially environment will change will be is pretty astronomical. It's for everyone.
I mean, you can imagine in these neighborhoods, if when, you know, there's certain kind of minor arterials or arterials, and then tons of little streets that feed off those. If we lose one of our roads, you know, due to a flood, you know, where like just a section blows out, that's going to be tremendously impactful. And we should be thinking about, so that's what I'm kind of thinking about when we think, you know, how fast should we replace undersized old infrastructure? And then when we do that, how much of a kind of a climate bonus do we put on what our design standards are? That's the kind of stuff you know, it's like heading off some of those, like getting ahead of those extreme events before we lose some critical road that, you know, is just integral to how we get around.
So there's a limit to what we can plan for. Just looking at Colleen there, they got 2 feet of rain. We are in no way prepared in this area to get 2 feet of rain. And yet that is the type of climate event that could happen. And where we're at right now is we are in transit to what a future climate will look like. And what we're seeing now with atmospheric rivers that have different trajectories, different durations and intensities, and all of a sudden we're losing part of the highway abutment in Bellingham, or you have the alternation between unimaginable drought, where the largest reservoirs in California were empty, having them filled the next year, and in cases having spillways that nearly collapse and take out Sacramento. The variation that we're going to look at is something that I don't think right now we can actually, because we know that we have to design more robustly and bigger, but we are not going to effectively plan against all contingencies. The past is not the key to the present. So the risks that I would like to look at, we have some really immediate risks, and that is the island concept, which I think you're somewhat getting to. If we lose a road, how do we manage around that? I look at it the same way I would if we were looking at a magnitude 9 earthquake. what are our resources going to be and how are we going to reallocate and support our community in the event of such a disaster. I think that planning can be done in advance, and general plans can be drawn up. And those islands include issues like the smoke problem that we had when the Carlton fire was burning. And all of a sudden, people needed respiratory assistance. And the heat dome, where hundreds of people in the Northwest died because they didn't have access to cooling and there was not an organizational approach set up to connect people with the resources they needed swiftly enough so that we didn't lose elders in their own home. So those are the impacts. The impacts to human health are profound. The impacts to emergency management are, I think, something that any municipality, the purpose of government is to support the people in the community. So with that in mind, how do we support the people in our community through these impacts? And some of the short term, losing a road, managing flow path around that. That's going to be the challenge of the future. Improving some of the infrastructure as we change it out. That will be critical. So what a climate resilient Lake Forest Park looks like to me, it's a Lake Forest Park that has effective planning, community planning. But it also has things like safe walking and biking paths from all parts of town down to the lake shore and the commercial center. It has, for any given community, more than one road out. And that's a fire safety thing for tree board. If you've ever been in a forest fire and there's only one road out, you will learn what fear feels like. So these steps are progressive and holistic, but I think can be integrated effectively into long-term planning for the city. So, a climate resilient Lake Forest Park looks pretty happy to me. There's people who can walk down the street without getting killed, can ride a bicycle, take their kid down to the seashore, stop for an ice cream, make their way back home without having to get in the car. Where people are a little bit healthier because they're happy getting outside. They know their neighbors more because they see them more often. And we have shade in the summer, heat in the winter. And enough water that everybody has their water supply needs met, and enough clean air that people can breathe. Not asking too much.
What about you, Victoria?
A number of things that have been named. What comes to mind for particularly the second bullet point to me immediately is extreme heat and smoke and fire danger, especially through the context of tree canopy and our vegetation. Both what is extreme heat going to do to the trees that have thrived here and to the viability of some of our trees and our ability to maintain that canopy. And how do you balance healthy vegetation with mitigating fire risk? And we're seeing more and more fires that are spreading in closer and closer to urban areas and suburban areas, and mitigating that risk as it becomes more and more common.
I'll add a little bit, because you guys have covered a lot. Infrastructure is really important. One of those, I tend to think about the community and helping them understand what could happen and what to do if it does happen. So that's the education piece. And along those lines, a lot of the conversations we've had with people are, when the power goes out and you want me to get rid of my gas, heat, and go to all electric, what am I supposed to do? So I think we need to solve that, because we're gonna have power outages, more and more of them. And so helping the community with that. So helping people know what to do and how to work together when these things happen, because they will happen.
Microgrids.
Yes. And that's the infrastructure. But no. To me, smoke and heat are gonna be, continue to be problems.
It will also be cold. I mean, weather weirding is a really good way to put it. We will have winters that are colder than.
Right, and if your power goes out, it's a real problem.
Yeah.
It's cool.
I like what you're saying about the human side of all of this. Right? What does it mean to be resilient as a meeting member of Lake Forest Park?
Right,
And then,
Yeah.
and then how does, we're talking about Lake Forest Park as an isolated city, right? But Lake Forest Park is also part of this whole geography of this area. It's like, what are we doing here that impacts Kenny, that impacts Bothell, that impacts Briar? How do we work together to address the climate impacts? I think what's most important to me about all of this is like when I'm talking to my 20-year-old son, he's pretty resigned. He knows that climate change it's here, right? And that we're just now beginning to see what that means. And his life, his kids' lives are going to be very different what we can even imagine. I think there's going to be a lot of innovation out of that. I'm not the kind of person who thinks of things like this as being it's all negative, because I think human beings do adapt. And I think that's what we're talking about, is how are we going to adapt to this new circumstances, new circumstances on this earth? How are we going to adapt, ensure that our future generations can adapt to these changing circumstances? So I think that's what's most important to me, is like, what are we giving to our next generation? Whether that's my sons who live in this area or they move away, but who's moving into Lake Forest Park to represent, to live as this changing environment. Mark, I'm curious about
Forgive my different perspective, right? I'm not a member.
but
And so I don't mean to change the perspective. Or say this is the way you should do it. I work for the community, so my preference is focus on my role. And how I see these questions and this effort is it fulfills that policy segment that supports the implementation plan and informs the development regulations for the future, which I implement on the primarily new buildings. So whether it informs stronger or more detailed critical area requirements, to whatever extent it can, or road design or anything, that to me is where the interest lies, because that's what I do. So change of perspective, I fully want to learn from the community, not here to tell you what Lake Forest Park is, but my interest really is, municipal code, development review, project review, decision by decision over the next 10, 20, 30 years. One property at a time, then battling it out. There will be a balance, because you have property rights, you have values. But that's my perspective, and then to facilitate whatever you need to get through this process.
And I think we're in agreement that what we do here helps inform that policy.
I think what you're getting at, and I totally agree with it, but is kind of there are certain things we can and should strive for incrementally, because that's how it works, right? Small actions, whether it's a code amendment, whether it's thinking about, and I'd love to hear more, in future meetings, kind of from the tree board perspective, about how should we be thinking about what types of tree species and canopy goals should we have in mind as we also establish things like, development regulations and mitigation plans and things like that, so that we're building or encouraging forests that are resilient, right? So I think there's this incremental path that is more where where you sit as the planning director, and then there's the kind of the how are we resilient to the extremes that we've all talked about to some degree already, and we have to do both. Some degree.
But the community is the vision, the mission, the goals. My interest is more the tail end, so it makes more sense as a piece of property, what can I do? And then play that role, and then later on. Not just forget that I'm a human being, but be there for budget discussions. The comprehensive plan amendment is supposed to inform every decision by the city going forward. So whether it's how I do my budget, how I talk to people about what they can do with the property. What you capture in your sentiments and policy is the beginning of how that trails down. And then we have the plan action plan, which fortunately is already there, and then I do tailor. My staff does the tailor.
But I think it all feeds into the code. I think that the code is where we express all of those concepts.
Yeah.
The code is how you get to that end.
Exactly. So when as a planner, and doing this every hour, we work with certain documents, when I see climate resilient Lake Forest Park, we have a strong climate element, we have a greenhouse gas inventory, we have vehicle miles traveled, we have all the policy that supports the implementation plan, we have an implementation plan, we have outreach, we have active committee, active community, and then we have the resources and staff to do development review in accordance with that full picture. That to me should have a positive effect. At some level. I think it's your mission to decide where that is for this community.
Okay, this is great discussion. I'm loving it. Frantically taking notes over here. Any additions to either of these questions?
Just keeping in mind that we have just about 20 minutes left of our meeting.
Perfect. And great time check. This is our last item, so I don't want to stand between you and the door. Virtually.
Sometimes when we're working with committees, one another like this, we don't always think about, we don't always do the job to get to know one another. So I'm hoping that we have the opportunity to get to know one another more than just you are part of this. What's that?
Said party.
Party at my house.
Yeah.
Well, David, I'll look forward to working with you as the chair, and I'll just share that I love icebreakers. I know that they can be contentious at times, but I love a good icebreaker to help the group get to know each other. So if you'd like to incorporate that as the chair, I'm happy to recommend some.
Okay.
You do that with CAC. Yeah. I think it's fun.
It's funny. I hate icebreakers. But I implement them all the time. It's important people get to know one another, so.
Yeah.
I promise they'll be good.
Anything else? Alexandra?
I think that's it. I can pass it back over to you for the remaining items
Okay.
on our agenda. I'll stop sharing here.
Well, we don't have anything for old business, obviously.
Yeah.
So next meeting is as scheduled is Tuesday, November 19th. It will be in person and it will also be online. As scheduled. So are there any conflicts at this point? Then we've all kind of agreed that this would be a workable date for us. Okay. Anything else before we?
Yeah, in terms of meeting and meeting preparation for the next meeting, I don't know if everyone's had a chance to at least glance through the climate action plan. But it would give you an idea, I mean, for example, vehicle miles, building envelopes are really things we're looking at. Your transportation, housing, buildings are really the drivers in our community. One thing I would love is if, from the planning commission side, if you could identify parts of the code that you're wrestling with, for example, that you think it might be useful for us to start digging into. And from tree board, I understand that there was supposed to be a tree survey completed this last year.
Yes,
Has that been completed?
Yep.
Is it up?
it is. It's on the city website. It was presented to city council in March, maybe, something like that. Early spring, I think.
Right when it started, yeah. Then
So-
adopted, it's on the website.
So, I was wondering if we could at some point have like just a 5-minute overview of big issues from tree board.
Yep, I can bring some
Yeah.
highlights from the report to the
How
next
are
meeting.
our cedars doing? How are the birch doing?
It's not that specific, but I can bring some highlights and give information about our tree inventory.
I would be very interested, I don't know if, you know, if we can just start gaining common knowledge instead of siloed knowledge, I think it will be
Sure.
helpful to all of
Think
us
it's a good
going
idea.
forward.
Agenda.
Always the report.
And I do think it's a great idea to read the, I haven't looked at it for a while myself, so. But you all did a lot.
So
Okay,
our to-do list before the 19th, get refreshed on that.
yeah,
Definitely want to do that.
The other thing I wondered, is it possible to, is the contract with Cascadia online? Is that a public document?
It's public document, it is online, but it's not broadcast like all the other work product. It's in resolutions and ordinances under city code. You want a copy or?
Like a link, can you send a link to it? I don't want
Um,
a copy, I just want to see what you told her she was gonna do.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll share it with you. The link normally works because it takes you to a document. What the link's gonna do is gonna take you to a year and a bunch of numbers that say resolution 1946, resolution blah, blah, blah. The easiest one is just grab the PDF. To have that in my folder.
That would be easier, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You could send it.
Because otherwise you're gonna be.
Yeah,
And
and
then
yeah,
search on all the resolutions to find that number, which luckily we have. So we're at the top here. 1948. So help, and what I'm offering, what else am I doing? Middle housing. I'm offering to build a middle housing library in November with key documents. For CPAT, I'll do the same thing. It probably mirrors what's on the website, but it's more forthright and deals with these meetings.
Say that again,
Like a library,
we have lots of stuff, but they're not on the website.
and it's electronic, but in the sense of, do you have the materials? Because I don't want to assume that everyone has the same preparation or involvement from the past, that they've read the climate action plan or the resolution or the commerce scope or the, you know,
Yeah, would love to have that in one. That's.
Yeah.
one
or the
place.
tree board reports.
Mhm.
and it's a lot of material, but what it does is read what you're interested in, but at least it's all there.
Yeah. That would be cool.
okay. So our promise is for those of us who are not up to date with the climate action plan, we'll read that. November
Don't need to
19th.
read every word.
Review.
Review.
Instead of
Okay.
read.
Review,
Okay,
refamiliarize.
all right. So, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Yes.
So, okay, all in agreement?
I.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. Take care.
Thank you.
So next Earth Day and Arbor Day are 22nd and the